Good morrow, kind sir. I am the Meister of Moonset, a.k.a. Jerry the Warlock, sworn protector of the realm and vanquisher of the dark arts. I have answered thine call to purge thine abode of malevolent spirits.
Oh, okay. Please come inside. So, what's the plan to cast this ghost out of my house?
The tools of my craft can be found in this bag of holding. Seize for me the dragon scales and lich brew.
You mean the Doritos and Orange Crush?
Nat 20. Silence! The dead are restless. I'll do a perception check. A 3. Well, that's not very helpful. But fear not, for I wield Eldritch Blast.
Eldritch Blast? That sounds serious.
Absolutely, Mr. Hurley, 'tis very serious. The only thing standing between us and a banshee's claws around our throats is a mere roll of the die. Now, let us form a protective circle. I shall begin the invocation. O mighty Palor, shield us from evil. Careful! A ghastly form from the astral plane!
That's just my cat, Ivan.
Maybe it's a poltergeist, or maybe a mind flayer. Fear not, Mr. Hurley. I shall guard us against the shadow creature. I wield Wall of Force.
That's a 2?
Son of a bitch!
Are you sure you're equipped for an exorcism?
By the power of Greyhawk spirits, be gone!
Oh boy. Please tell me that was just the wind.
Probably just the wind. Not 20, just the wind.
Just get out of here, please.
Very well, Mr. Hurley. I shall take my leave of you, but know this. The spirits of your dwelling tremble at my might. Should they dare rise again and you find yourself in need of my aid, you need only roll the dice, and I shall appear. I shall appear a beacon of hope, and I shall be there at your beck and call. Fear not, Mr. Hurley, for in Moonsets, the forces of evil know that I, Jerry, am a force to be reckoned with.
Ugh, this town just keeps getting stranger. Although my cat Ivan did die a year ago.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
And we have returned to the Creep Street Podcast. Of course, follow us on all the socials, Facebook and Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter or X at Creep Street Pod. We were on TikTok. I don't know what the sitch is with that, but we were on TikTok. So, we may or may not be, depending on how things play out here. But anyway, let's go ahead and jump right back into our story. I think we've waited long enough. So, a few years would go by from where we last left off at House 333. And random, strange events would happen sporadically. But by 2012, there were 2 new folks living in 333. A guy named Alan stayed in the second largest room, and then in the third room stayed a guy named Grundy. And by this time, William was also dating a new woman named Grace that he had met through his brother Darren and Darren's wife Lisa. So Fridays were pretty much the only day off that Darren had, which, he usually spent either playing golf with his father or just hanging out with his brother and whatnot. But by the way, the book obviously goes into deeper detail about these people's personal lives, because there is also stuff that was going on in their marriages and stuff that, just so people know, if you want, a deeper dive into these people's personal lives, the book is where you can get it. But back to the story here. Well, one night, William and Grace, they come home after a great night at the casino. Darren and his wife Lisa, they're with them, and the 2 couples, they return home to House 333 and they're in high spirits. I'm guessing maybe they won a little bit of cash that night. They're laughing and telling stories, and Darren and Lisa decide to call the night early, and they retreat to the guest room, and they leave William and Grace alone to chat in the living room. And the conversation was casual at first, but Grace suddenly grew very quiet, her demeanor becoming very different. She seemed very uneasy. She glanced towards the bay window and whispered, "Is someone else in the house?" William immediately feels this chill run down his spine, right? He reassures her that Darren and Lisa are the only two people that are also in the house, and they're upstairs. But Grace shook her head. Her voice is trembling. She says, "No, I mean, someone's standing by the window." So William, suddenly his stomach just falls out from under him, right? And slowly he turns to the window with a chill running down his spine, and he looks, but once again, he sees nothing. But Grace is pale, and she's clearly staring at something or someone he couldn't see. Once again, it seems like a routine here, or a theme we're seeing is that William can't see the woman that's haunting this place, but all these guests can.
It's almost singling William out.
In a weird way, by not showing itself to him, in a weird way, it is sort of singling him out by not paying attention to it, or at least by not allowing itself to be seen by him, which might be its own form of attention. Like we said last week or in the last episode, maybe it's because for some reason the spirit feels fine with William, or who knows what the reason is. But yeah, there's clearly something special about William here.
It feels like the ultimate disrespect.
In a weird way, I mean, you gotta ask, what's worse? Being the only one who could see it, or the only one who can't? And part of me would say, well, I would prefer to be the guy who can't see it, but then at the same time, there's kind of an insult to that. You know what I mean?
I would want to see it.
I would want to see it. I wouldn't want to be the only one to see it, but I would certainly want to see it, especially after all these folks have seen it.
Inclusivity.
Absolutely. So he asks her, "What do you see?" And she describes seeing a faint figure of an older woman with piercing eyes gazing out of the window as if keeping watch. So not looking at them this time. She's not giving them a nasty look, but she's looking down out the window outside at something, giving a nasty look. So this encounter, of course, leaves both William and Grace unsettled, and Grace refused to sit near the window for the rest of the night, and William couldn't shake this feeling that the house was back to its paranormal bullshit again. And he probably doesn't want to scare his new love interest. You know what I mean? He probably doesn't want to scare her away, especially after he's been through a few relationships already that, and this ghost has sort of played a role in that.
Yeah, this ghost is the ultimate block.
Truly, in a way, or it's it's ignoring his in a way. It's he's getting blue-balled. It seemed that no matter how much time passed or who stayed at House 333, this mysterious entity would not let anyone forget that they were not alone. Keep in mind, too, that so far, there has not been any activity that seems blatantly dangerous. There hasn't been anything yet that seems to that they're in any sort of immediate physical harm. As William and Grace stood outside number 333 that night, the chill of the evening seemed to deepen, though William wasn't sure if it was the weather or unease creeping over him. But Grace's comment about that woman sent a shiver down his spine, and he could not help but recall the other sightings that people had reported over the years and how eerily similar the two sightings were. So he took a deep breath, and he ushered Grace back inside, doing his best to dismiss the incident, as maybe it was just a trick of the light or, some other inexplicable factor. But once inside, William just couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were being watched. Grace, too, seemed uncharacteristically quiet. Occasionally, she would glance over her shoulder as they moved through the house like she sensed something and would quickly look over her shoulder. And despite his efforts to reassure her, William couldn't help but feel that the house itself seemed to be alive with an unseen presence. One that had made its mark on so many who had crossed its threshold. It's like the house immediately knows when someone enters it. Though the evening passed without further incident, William just could not ignore what Grace had seen and how it sort of played into everything that had transpired in the years previous. But yeah, once again, it's as if when they step through the threshold of the house knows someone's there. Like it's more than just spirits, that it's like the house itself.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's very creepy, very like almost Lovecraftian in a way.
Maybe this ghost has some sort of doorway detector, some sort of ghost ring camera or something.
So, as always, William did his best to play it cool. Though his curiosity was anything but casual, he asked Grace with a forced sort of nonchalantness, I don't know what the right proper verbiage is there, but he asked Grace, as cool and collected as he could, what the old lady she had seen looked like. And he didn't want to tell her much at first. He wanted to see if her description matched up with those of the people who had claimed to have seen her before. Grace would describe her as, quote, quite old, with a short gray perm, wearing a cardigan, leaning on the windowsill with her arms stretched out. She added, her voice tinged with unease, she was looking directly at us as we got out of the taxi. So, this was someone Grace had seen before they entered. Maybe thought, oh, maybe she's in a different house or something. But remember, then she saw her again when they were inside, and the old lady was looking out the window. So, it's almost like the old lady is looking at anyone who would pass by or she thinks might be entering her home. Interesting that, remember in the last episode, there was the friend who got freaked out because the old lady appeared by the Christmas tree. And it was like she was looking at them. This time, though, Grace, when they're inside, sees her again, but she's looking out the window. I don't know if there's anything to that. I don't know if that would imply that the spirit isn't too concerned with them, but was concerned with that other friend. I'm not sure. Well, of course, this creeps out William, and he obviously didn't even really need Grace's description of this old woman to know that this was most likely Mrs. Tompkins, the woman he had been told about in the last episode. She had obviously been the one making herself known over the years with her manifestations, whether in the window or by the Christmas tree or whatnot. It was clear that this was the same Mrs. Tompkins. And as Grace's words echoed in his mind, William could not help but wonder what it was about House 333 that sort of bound her spirit there. As their relationship progressed, William and Grace, they settled into a routine. Weeknights were often spent at Grace's house, where she lived with her 7-year-old son, Elliot, and weekends were typically spent at House 333. So Grace is now working as a hairstylist and often had her evenings free, making their time together, relaxed and enjoyable. But one night, one Friday evening, Grace arrived at William's house after a late shift, and the two decided to have a cozy night in, and they shared a couple bottles of wine and even got a pizza that evening before heading to bed. William quickly drifts off to sleep, but not long after, he's suddenly awakened by Grace. She's like panicked, her voice is trembling, and she whispers, "There's someone downstairs." They pause, and they listen, and Grace adds, "It sounds like more than one person." So suddenly William is fully awake. His drowsiness is gone. He's on edge. He reaches for his phone and quickly texts his housemates, Alan and Bruden, to see if maybe it might be one of them come home early. And the responses came back almost immediately. Alan was still at the bar where he worked, enjoying an after-hours drink with the staff. And Bruden was spending the night at his girlfriend's place. So there was no one else home except William and Grace. William moved to the front window to peek outside, hoping to spot anything that might explain the unsettling noises. Maybe something going on out front. But no. Just a few ruffians, a few scoundrels, causing some ballyhoo. But then, the unmistakable sound of footsteps returned, echoing from downstairs. They were deliberate, heavy footsteps that seemed to move with purpose through the house. Like it wasn't just walking around, this ghost seemed to have shit to do. It was getting things done.
Somebody's got to clean up this place.
Absolutely. William and Grace aren't doing it. Alan and Bruden aren't doing it. Someone's got to whip these boys into shape. William and Grace freeze. They're listening to the sound of these footsteps. Whatever's causing the noise, it was not one of the housemates, and it certainly was not intent on staying quiet. And really, from what it sounds like, it doesn't even sound like an old lady. It sounds like someone bigger. The impression I'm getting is that it's not a dainty, frail old lady stomping around. So William would later describe these footsteps as, quote, deliberate, like two people in heavy boots pacing back and forth between the kitchen and the front room. The sounds were so loud and purposeful that William couldn't shake the feeling that whoever or whatever was responsible wanted to be heard. So gathering his courage, he cautiously creeps out of the bedroom and onto the landing, careful to step over that notorious loose floorboard that would give off that creaking sound. So Alan approaches the living room door, and he can hear these footsteps going on inside. As he reaches out his hand and touches the handle of the living room door, the footsteps abruptly stop. So William pauses for a moment. He takes a deep breath and opens the door. As William opened the living room door, he was immediately struck by a strange electric buzzing sound that seemed to hum in the air. Now, this is very common in instances of high strangeness. You often hear about it in UFO sightings, cryptid sightings, this sort of almost hum, like a discordant hum in the air. It's a phenomenon that sort of crosses boundary lines in terms of ghosts, UFOs, cryptids, all that. It's another one of those sort of...
Seems like something that attests to how it works.
Exactly. Let's say if these are interdimensional travelers, like that maybe this is some sort of offshoot or byproduct of what happens, kind of like we were saying the smell of ozone. Like maybe it's a byproduct of whatever happens when you make that jump or that interdimensional passage.
Yeah, exactly.
It didn't take long, but that's when William noticed another buzzing sound, but this one, he knew what it was. The plasma television, which was off when they went upstairs. It was now on, glowing eerily in the darkened room. His stomach once again drops as he remembers distinctly turning it off before him and Grace went upstairs after they had their wine and their pizza. He remembers specifically turning off that television.
Again, I mean, he describes the initial sound as an electrical buzzing, and then there's an electrical device on.
Yeah, absolutely. So who knows how much of this hum was coming from the plasma television, but regardless, that sort of electrical hum is something that happens across genres, essentially. He quickly checked both the front and back doors, and they were locked and secured just as he had left them. He returned to the living room and switched off the television and made his way back upstairs to Grace, recounting what he had found.
Who left on the telly?
Who left on the telly?
While relieved that there was no physical entity down there, Grace was deeply unsettled by the phantom footsteps and the television being on. Neither of them managed to sleep much that night, but it would be far from the last unsettling event that either of them would experience at number 333. The house was not yet done with them. So by 2013 now, so we're going ahead, Alan and Bruden had both moved out, leaving William alone again in house 333. It seems like a revolving door, right? But we have to also keep in mind, it's not necessarily that people are being run out of there afraid. It is that William is the owner of this place. And so people, who are leasing will naturally eventually come and go. And William will remain being the owner. So it's not necessarily like it's a revolving door because people are getting scared away. I just wanted to clarify that just so we know, because, since the beginning, we've seen a lot of people move in and out. His brother, his friends, all this stuff. So it's more a revolving door because William is the owner of the place. So he's naturally going to be the consistent person there.
I wonder if William's real estate agent also met with the ghost at some point and was like, okay, here's the deal. This guy's going to be buying the house. One rule is you can't show yourself to him.
Because right. Because it's like, you got to get one person to stay.
Otherwise, this place is going to be torn down.
Exactly.
Is that what you want?
Exactly. No ghost wants that. So, adding to this, though, by this time, Grace and William, their relationship
had gone to shit.
It became
a relationship.
It went from ship to shit.
Ship to shit.
So by this time, they had been going through a rough patch, leading to a temporary separation. This strain was amplified, of course, by William's decision to buy a hair salon and to appoint Grace as the manager, which, it's a lot. That's a lot. While he continued working long hours at the car dealership, the additional demands of running the hair salon pulled his focus and exacerbated tensions in their relationship amid the personal and professional pressure. William found himself navigating this house on his own once more with no one else there with him, the environment feeling even more oppressive than ever before. So, by the end of 2013, William welcomed in a new housemate there at 333, a 25-year-old woman named Sadie that was introduced to him through a mutual friend. Sadie moved into the larger back room, the second largest bedroom. And to mark the occasion, William hosted a small welcoming party, and the gathering carried on into the early hours of the morn, eventually winding down with only William and Sadie and a guest named Seth that remained. And with taxis unavailable that evening, Seth asked if he could crash on the couch that night. William agreed to it, wanting to sleep in the next morning. He left the keys in the door so that Seth could let himself out without disturbing anyone. Little did they know, however, that this ordinary arrangement would soon lead to another eerie event at the house. The next morning, it's around 9 a.m., and William stirred briefly as he heard Seth slam the front door, signaling his departure, and he went back to sleep, naturally. So a couple hours later, around 11, William actually woke up, and of course he's met with a head-splitting headache from a hangover. Groggily, he made his way to the bathroom, and he passed the stairs, and as he did, something caught his attention. The front door was ajar. So panic washed over him, and he bolted downstairs because he's afraid that maybe the place had been burgled. He went outside, looked to make sure his car was still there. Thankfully, his car was still there, and nothing appeared to be taken. However, there was something very strange. Sadie's handbag was outside. Its contents had been scattered around. He rushed back inside, woke up Sadie, and they went downstairs. And what was weird was all of Sadie's items had been scattered around from her handbag, but nothing was taken. Weird. It's like it's as if something wanted her out, but didn't care to take her things. It was like, get out. Like it threw her stuff or something. It's very weird.
Another possibility, the burglar was scared off by something. Because what if it was indeed a burglary gone wrong? And not to mention, every person who's entered this house has experienced some feeling once they get beyond that threshold.
Yes.
Maybe the burglar saw something and was so terrified, he just threw the purse aside.
Absolutely.
And ran for his life.
I think that's a good guess as any, because as we know, the old lady seems to be looking down from the window with a grimace, with an evil eye at anyone who might enter. I mean, yeah, it would make sense that she would treat a burglar, that she would scare the shit out of a burglar more so than she would just a regular house guest.
Either way, tell William he has nothing to fear in terms of home security.
Clearly. I mean, you want to talk about a home security system, that Ghost should be sponsoring podcasts. So Sadie checked, of course, her phone, money, even her cigarettes, they're all there. Everything was accounted for, which only deepened the mystery. Why would someone break into the house, take the handbag outside, scatter its contents, but not take anything? The strange and senseless nature of the act was almost creepier than if they had been burgled. So William apologizes profusely to Sadie, and he feels bad that, oh great, her first night in and this weird shit happens. He checked with Seth to make sure that, he had not been the one who left the door ajar. And of course, Seth said he made sure it was closed. Eventually, the two were able to kind of calm down and go back inside. However, once again, as they stepped through the door, they were confronted with something far more unsettling than what they had already seen. As soon as they stepped inside, William and Sadie were greeted by the sight of 5 sharp knives stabbed deeply into the wooden floorboards between the living room and the kitchen. Each knife was driven in at least 2 inches into the wood floor, and here's the kicker. They were aligned meticulously by size, spaced evenly in between them. So keep in mind, we're assuming this happened after they stepped outside to look at the handbag, so it happened within a matter of minutes. And it was done with precision, equal spacing. It's going to take some gusto and some good quality knives to drive them a few inches into a hardwood floor.
Yeah, no kidding.
So what kind of message was this thing trying to send? William was trying to keep calm, and he told Sadie to just stay in the living room while he cautiously stepped over the knives and entered the kitchen. Immediately, he noticed that the knives had been taken from the knife block on the kitchen counter, and adding to the eerie scene, one of the kitchen drawers hung open along with 2 cupboard doors. So here you had a sinister atmosphere, but no clear message. But the part that, it's not just knives being in the floor, it's how meticulously organized they were. That's weird.
Yeah, again, this spirit seems to be quite obsessive compulsive.
Absolutely, yes. Well, of course, they are both shaken, and William returns to the living room and calls Seth, and he demanded to know if Seth had played some sort of weird joke on them, and Seth is equally baffled. He swears, of course, it wasn't him. He wouldn't do that. And
he wouldn't put the salad fork on the left.
Right, exactly. I mean, Seth knows his way around a dinner table. He knows his way. He's seen Pretty Woman. He knows where the where the caviar fork or spoon goes. But he also said, because remember, it was about 9 when Seth left and about 11 when William got up. He says that when he left at 9, Sadie's handbag was not out on the sidewalk. So that had happened within that 2-hour gap. And then keep in mind, the knives in the floor, too, we assume happened while they were out looking at the bag. He even went so far as to stress that he had made sure to shut the door behind him when he left and slammed it for good measure. William couldn't debate that. He recalled hearing the sound of the door slam at 9 a.m. because it actually woke him up. So he apologized for any accusations he leveled at Seth and hung up on the phone call, but so far there had been nothing like that yet to have happened in House 333. and it was no doubt that whatever force resided in the home was now becoming more aggressive. Sadie abruptly departed in 2014, and it came as a shock to William. He returned home from work one evening to find her gone, leaving behind most of her belongings and several months of unpaid rent. The suddenness of her exit and the eerie silence of the house only made House 333 that much more creepy. So left to sort out her remaining possessions with her family, that's the other thing, is William had to then sort out the stuff with Sadie's family on her behalf. So something got her to where she was like out the door. However, she hadn't been paying, sounds like she hadn't been paying rent. So who knows? There might have been something else going on in Sadie's life.
Sure.
But like we've said, these things seem to feed on negative energy. If there was some, let's just say Sadie had a drug addiction or something. There's nothing that says she did. It would make sense too. It could, lend itself to that as well if there's like an atmosphere of unhappiness or gloom about the place,
Or a toxic kind of environment, toxic behaviors.
Exactly, right. It wasn't long though before William would secure a new roommate, a guy named Timmy, a friend of over 10 years. Despite being well aware of the house's strange and unnerving history, because Timmy, he had been, even though he hadn't lived there, he had been told about these stories. And despite knowing all that, Timmy agreed to move in, taking the larger room in the back where Sadie had resided. Little did he know, though, that the mysterious activity was far from over. Around this time, William's brother Darren moved temporarily into the house as well, taking the smaller room overlooking the front garden. You must assume something little trouble in paradise in Darren's marriage to Lisa. While he had often stayed on Sunday nights, this time it was different. He confided that him and Lisa, of course, were having troubles. If he could he stay indefinitely? So the new arrangement actually worked out well for everyone, because now William had 2 new roommates to help share expenses with. And the boys loved beer and television. It all worked out well. William and Darren frequently recounted the eerie experiences they had encountered over the years there at House 333. And Timmy, of course, was fascinated by these tales. But Timmy would soon find himself going from a listener to an active participant in the strange activity of House 333. You see, one afternoon, Timmy came home early from work to find himself alone in the house. And after letting himself inside, I guess he had to use the John because he hurried over to the bathroom, unaware that his quiet afternoon was about to take a chilling turn. So it says Timmy was sitting on the toilet, staring ahead at the door, when he noticed the light cord hanging nearby begin to move. And think about that. You're kind of indisposed there. You're in a very vulnerable, other than maybe being fully naked in the shower, you're kind of in a position of vulnerability, and you can't just...
You're out there.
You're out there,
man.
You are riding the waves. Pants at his ankles, sitting on the John, and here we go. This cord starts moving around.
Not the only swinging dick in there.
So he's looking at this cord, and as it sways gently, it's enough movement that it's like you can tell it's not like a draft or like a fan or something moving it slow. There's something clearly like a push motion to it.
Yeah, plus if there was a draft, you'd think he would also feel it.
Exactly. Right. So the cord suddenly spins violently in the air and slams against the wall with an audible thud, like someone took it and like whipped it, like whoosh against the wall. So of course, thank God Timmy's already sitting on the John, because he's probably shitting his pants right now.
Right.
Frozen in shock. He's literally frozen there. Timmy, imagine then having to go through the accoutrement of finishing up. He finishes up as quickly as he can, gives his hands a wash, and runs downstairs. I'm assuming the gentleman washed his hands. I can't imagine he's that terrified. What's more terrifying, a haunting or pink eye, am I right? E. coli, I'm not sure what all the nasties that come from that sort of thing.
Nasties. Nasty bastards.
So he bolts downstairs, and he like he's the only one at home for a little bit till William and Darren gets home. So he kind of stays in the living room. Like, he's like, I'm just going to hang out down here. That's kind of what I would do, is like, if there was something creepy happening in like, well, obviously I would want to leave, but like, say for whatever reason, say it was the middle of the night or it was freezing out or something, I would probably go to the frontmost room, turn on the lights, and just kind of wait. You know, that's probably what I would do too, is be near the door, but still inside, sort of thing. So that makes sense. So when they get home, when Darren and William get home, Timmy tells them all about the strange thing that happened while he was sitting on the toilet. And, you know, of course, these guys have seen enough that they don't doubt him for a second. They believe every word he says, so which was a relief to Timmy. Granted, though, but Timmy had also been told about all the weird things that had happened, too. So they were kind of all in on it together. There wasn't a thing of, like, having to convince each other or anything like that. So that was at least nice. At least they were all in it together. So several weeks go by, and the weird stuff at 333 just keeps escalating. Timmy this time is away for the weekend. William had spent the evening enjoying his usual routine of beers and takeaway food and headed off to bed. Darren, however, had gone out for the night and didn't return home until about 4 a.m. He was feeling a bit peckish, as you might, especially if you'd been out drinking. He decided to grab one last beer from the fridge and called it a night. And as he entered the kitchen, he noticed an unusual movement near the window. Instinctually, Darren turns and looks up at the window, and his heart drops. At first, it was just a bright white shape drifting around outside in the garden. Its movements, though, were strangely deliberate. So Darren suddenly becomes fully alert. His first instinct is, maybe this is someone with a flashlight, like an intruder, walking through. There was something about the way the light moved that just seemed...
It seemed like it was being directed.
Yes, it was like it was being directed. There was purpose to the way it was moving. So Darren cautiously approaches the window and looks outside and is completely not ready for what he sees. The figure came then into full view, the ghostly apparition of an elderly woman, her form shimmering faintly in the dim light as she floated with an almost eerie grace towards the window. She's translucent, pretty much, and her features are both vivid yet ethereal and otherworldly. It was almost like she's see-through, but she's not hard to see, if that makes sense. It's clear what he's seeing, even though this form itself is sort of translucent. Sort of like when you see water in a glass. You can see through the water, but you know there's water in the glass. It's clear to see. He's just kind of paralyzed with fear, and he describes later that this presence was sort of radiating a sort of sense of the otherworldly. Like it wasn't just the sight of seeing a floating see-through woman. There was something about the presence itself that seemed otherworldly, if that makes sense. You would think that would be obvious, but he made the distinction of saying there was something also just about the presence that seemed otherworldly. So he's standing there frozen in place, his mind is racing, and this ghostly figure solidifies before his eyes. And he had heard of William's description of this Mrs. Tompkins and was now certain that this spectral lady was her, that this was Mrs. Tompkins' manifest, essentially. The apparition seemed almost alive in its awareness, suddenly halting in its movement. And it turned and looked at him directly. So it's like he watched this thing manifest, and then it's like it's walking towards the house, but then it notices him. That's got to be creepy. On top of you're already seeing this thing that's probably scaring the hell out of you. But then it's like all of a sudden, if you were to see a lion in the wild and you're already freaked, and then all of a sudden it stops and it looks at you. That sort of thing. It's like, oh, great.
Yeah.
It's like you were scared already, but now it adds a new layer. It's like it wasn't aware of Darren at first, and then it spotted him.
It's got to trigger that primal fear.
Right. He said later, recalling the instant, he said it wasn't merely looking in his direction, but it was, quote, fully aware of his presence, locking eyes with him in a way that felt deeply intentional. So, for what feels like an eternity, the two stand there in silence. This woman outside in the garden and Darren looking out the window at her. They're just kind of like looking at each other. Darren is too stunned to look away. He's like shaking in fear, but he can't move. And then, with what the source describes as an unsettling grace, the elderly woman turned away, resuming her slow, deliberate movements before vanishing completely, passing effortlessly through the wall of the neighbor's extension. The experience obviously rattled Darren, and it made me wonder when I read that part. So she sees him, and it's almost like she then goes back to what she's doing, and notice what it said about it disappeared into the neighbor's extension. Part of me wonders, because as we know, this is a semi-detached house, if it was always that way. If maybe when she lived there, maybe the blueprints were different. Because that's something we've talked about in Creep Street before, that if something is a residual haunting, even though this sounds slightly more upscale than residual, whereas a residual could be even just the energy of one. It doesn't even mean that that person's spirit is there, rather than it's the manifestation of that energy or that event replaying. This doesn't necessarily, though, feel demonic or anything, but maybe when she lived there, the blueprint was different, and she is obeying the laws of the space that was when she was alive, maybe, is what that might insinuate. Why she would vanish into the neighbor's part of maybe it was because at one point there wasn't a detachment. Who knows? I don't know. That's just maybe one way of explaining why it would venture into the neighbor's house.
Certainly a potential explanation there, though.
Exactly, right. Well, the weird stuff was not yet done at House 333.
It never is. Oh, Lord, it never is.
So Darren calls out to William. William gets up. He's all groggy with sleep, and he goes downstairs to find out what his brother's grumbling about. But you would also think by this time that you would have known that there was enough weird stuff going on that if your brother suddenly was shouting for you in the middle of the night, you wouldn't be like, "What is it, you old bastard?" Like, you'd think you would know that, like, oh, this probably isn't just him being...
Yeah, you'd probably take it seriously.
You'd think you would be a little more gracious in your reception of this sudden alarm in the middle of the night. He half expected his brother, because given the late hour, that his brother was just drunk and pulling a prank, maybe, because I guess Darren... the boys would probably, I'm assuming every now and then the boys would tease each other, even though they all knew what was going on and acknowledged it. I'm sure from time to time, maybe they, there was the occasional, like, boo, or just like, think, because why not? You're all on air. And it's, in a way, maybe it's a good way of easing the tension, but certainly not at 4 a.m. when everyone's asleep. So all of that, though, goes out the door when William finds his brother, Darren, crouched near the kitchen table, pale as a ghost, trembling. The sight of seeing his brother William essentially crouched up, gosh, like now this is escalating to a level they had not. This is more than just seeing a miserly old woman in the window. This is something that's actively making these grown men afraid. More than you would be afraid, like we'd probably all be afraid if we had seen what they'd seen already, but this was to a different level, obviously.
Yeah, it implies he saw something absolutely terrifying.
Exactly, right. So he crouches down beside Darren, trying to, hey, brother, hey, bro, like, it's all good. He's trying to calm him. Almost like someone who just went through like a traumatic, whether it's, say, a bad car crash or some sort of it's almost like an immediate form of like post-traumatic stress. Like he's like, hey, everything's okay. Just tell me what you saw, that sort of thing. After a few moments, Darren is finally able to recount what he saw. And the whole time he's like, his eyes are darting around like he expects it to just pop up at any moment. Every detail that Darren shared mirrored everything that William knew about Mrs. Tompkins. Her hair was short, gray and permed, her, dark cardigan, that sort of thing. Everything they described was Mrs. Tompkins to a T. So William could not help but feel this chill run down his spine as everything he's saying just all lines up. For William, this was no coincidence. Darren had come face to face with this entity in a way I feel like none of them had yet, except maybe their one friend who saw her by the Christmas tree. He seems to have been the only one yet who has had such a vivid experience. So, while everything is escalating at the house, William actually was rekindling his relationship with Grace, and her presence at the house grew more consistent with each passing week. However, Grace's increasing time at the property also meant she found herself swept up in the bizarre phenomenon. Objects were starting to move on their own. Doors were slamming shut without warning. There were disembodied footsteps regularly now. It had become almost a nightly occurrence. Grace was, she had seen some things, but she had not yet experienced anything the like that the boys had yet. She quickly became a full believer herself, though, when she was experiencing these things firsthand. It was clear that whatever was going on at House 333 wasn't just going to be a sideshow anymore. This thing was making sure it was now the main event. It wasn't just weird little things happening in their periphery. Now it was going to be the focus of their lives, essentially. So William and Grace, one night, they lay frozen in their bed when they heard a very clear, deliberate whisper. They exchanged a look at each other, both kind of silently confirming with their eyes, "You heard that, right?" What the voice was saying was kind of indiscernible, but yet it was clear enough that they could tell that it sounded calm. It sounded like it was just talking nonchalantly. Downstairs, their friend Ian, who had been crashing that night on the couch, jolted awake when he thought he heard faint footsteps on the gravel path near the living room window. And as the moments ticked by, things kept getting creepier. Was there an intruder? Or was this another moment of manifestation? I'm assuming this whisper must have also sounded like it was coming from just outside. So you've also got to wonder, is this the ghost again, or is this an intruder of some kind? Because it's happening at the same time that their friend Ian is hearing footsteps outside. Well, William grabs a flashlight and carefully makes his way downstairs, and Grace follows closely behind him. And Ian was up and alert and met them at the bottom of the stairs. The three of them knew right away before they even said anything. They were like, "You heard that, right?" And they're like, "Yeah." So Ian, they knew immediately why Ian was waiting for them at the bottom of the stairs. They peer out into the garden. No sign of any movement, no footsteps. But there was this weight just kind of in the air, making it feel like something else was going to happen that night. Ian is just sitting there, rigid, pale, eyes wide, and he whispers, "Who was that?" And all of them, they kind of sit there quietly for a moment, and William finally says, "I don't know." But they all knew what they had heard. So they decide, let's go around back and have a look. Grace appeared at the living room door with a look of concern as the three of them tried to piece together what had happened. They went and looked. They didn't see anything outside, and the night would pass on with everyone in a sort of tense silence, everyone kind of on edge. Of course, now every little creak and groan the house makes you jump out of your skin. By the time dawn came, they had to ask themselves, was this another paranormal event, or was it actually an intruder? Because they're also, I guess, it seems like they're equally as concerned with intruders. I don't know if it's a problem in their neighborhood or what, but that was also a thing they had to worry about.
Just further adding to that feeling of paranoia, constant paranoia.
Right. Well, several months later, something freaky would happen again when Bob, another friend of William's, was staying the night. And in the middle of the night, he's suddenly awakened when the living room door swings open with a deliberate motion, but nothing standing in the doorway. Just the void leading into the kitchen from the living room. Literally, it was like someone, it wasn't just like it creaked open. It was literally like someone opened the door with purpose, but there's no one in the doorway. The room's empty, no sign of anyone, no indication of movement. So he just shook his head, trying to dismiss it as maybe just some kind of a weird draft or something. And he sinks back down into the couch, hoping to shake it off and fall back to sleep. But just as he's starting to drift off again, the television comes on. And the room is filled with that sort of blue, ethereal light that televisions give, we all know. The sudden noise and light jolted him upright, and he fumbles around for the remote, wanting to turn this thing off. His hands are clawing at the cushions, at the floor, but he can't find the remote anywhere. And the television is blaring loud, apparently. And its glow is like really bright. It seemed unusually bright and loud. Like they had not left it on loud like that when they had turned it off for the night. This wasn't just like, oh, turn up the volume so we can hear better. This is like blaring. So it's like they didn't even leave it like that when they turned it off. But then, as abruptly as it had switched on, the television turned off, plunging the room once again into darkness and silence. Bob sits there, heart pounding in his chest, waiting like for any sudden movements. But whatever had just happened, he knew that television, you don't just like, that doesn't just happen. You know what I mean? He knew he didn't just sit on the remote and then sit on it again and it turned off. Like, this was deliberate.
Plus, like you mentioned, the volume. I mean, if you don't leave the volume high, why would the TV turn on and the volume be high?
Exactly. But Bob could tell, even though nothing else happened the rest of the night, Bob felt like he was never alone in that room the rest of the evening. So 2015 keeps progressing, and we get to the month of December, and it's evening at House 333, and Grace had spent most of the day there indulging in Disney films and Christmas movies and whatnot, and the festive season is in full swing. The house, while obviously has a long reputation for being creepy, there was almost kind of, the holiday season was kind of making it more bearable. And as the clock struck 9:30 p.m., Grace decided to stretch her legs and make her way downstairs to the toilet. So she's strolling through the kitchen, her mind just thinking about Christmas or whatever, and she casually happened to glance out one of the windows. And she stops dead in her tracks. There, standing in the middle of the garden, was an elderly woman. Her figure bathed in an ethereal, almost luminous white glow. The woman's gaze was piercing, and she suddenly locked eyes with Grace and just looked at her. Time seemed to almost freeze as the two, kind of like with the last guy, they both kind of stand still. It's like time stands still and they're both staring at each other. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the elderly woman began to fade and eventually dissolved into the night, like she was never there. Grace stands there for a few more moments in the kitchen, frozen, with the image of this glowing woman kind of burned into her mind, and William returned home later that night, and she obviously wasted no time telling him what had happened, and though the house had seen its fair share of unexplained events, this ghostly sighting added a new layer of intrigue. As Grace settled in to house number 333, months would tick by, and it's early 2017 now. She and William embarked on a journey to transform the house into a true family home. Their vision included an extension to the back with various renovations, really make the property their own, inject it with new life. But as we know, oftentimes in these haunting cases, they don't like remodeling. There's something about changing the layout of the home that can cause the activity to spike.
They get very attached to that old Barcalounger.
That old song and dance. You know what I mean? They get it. You're right. You're absolutely right. But the renovations seem to awaken something on a whole new level within the house. The familiar heavy footsteps echoing through the halls were now louder and more frequent. But their source is elusive as ever. Shadowy apparitions began to manifest with alarming regularity, their fleeting forms visible in the corner of folks' eyes, lingering just long enough for you to turn your head, but then to be gone. The atmosphere at 333 grew heavier with each passing day, and the house's unseen residents seemed very unhappy and made their displeasure known. Grace, though, remained unfazed, and her determination to make the house their own remained steadfast. But William couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, and that something was maybe even waiting and plotting its next move. By 2019, the renovations to House 333 were finally complete. But the house's eerie activity showed no signs of slowing down. For the first time, Grace's young son, Elliot, became a direct target of the mysterious happenings. One afternoon, Elliot storms into the living room, visibly annoyed, and demanded to know why they kept calling his name. And that he had been calling out, "What? What do you want?" But they just kept calling his name. Well, the couple is obviously confused because they hadn't been calling him. So, a little bit skeptical, Elliot returned to his room, convinced maybe that they were playing a trick on him. But the tension didn't end there, because roughly 30 minutes later, Elliot appeared again, now more insistent than ever that someone was distinctly calling his name. William and Grace, of course, denied it, and the realization hit them that whatever was haunting 333 was now focused on Grace's child, seeming to taunt the boy. This was like an escalation that really hit close to home. It was like it was saying, okay, if me fucking with you isn't bad enough, maybe if I go after your kid, that ups the ante. Well, time would keep going, and Grace and William would tie the knot, embarking on married life amidst the ongoing unsettling activity at the house. The footsteps continued to echo through the property, but they were now joined by loud, deliberate bangs and thuds that seemed to reverberate within the walls themselves, as if something is knocking from within the walls. The sounds would come at random and would shock the hell out of them. They would become like boom, like it would come out of nowhere. One evening, there was a relentless thudding, just boom, boom, boom. Just it would not stop. William decided to try something new. He called out to the empty space and asked, quote, "If someone's here, knock twice." To his astonishment, the house responded. 2 sharp, deliberate knocks echoed back at him. It was undeniable now. Not only was this something otherworldly, it was truly aware of them and, in some ways, to some level, could interact with them. So now we're in the summer of 2022, so we're kind of getting close to modern day here. William took the bold step in his long-standing battle with House 333, or the entities that live there, and he opened the property up to a paranormal investigative team and a medium, both of whom conducted investigations that were later detailed in the book that I used as a source. And they uncovered new intriguing clues. Both investigations confirmed what William had long suspected, was that there wasn't just one spirit, but multiple presences at the house. Even more chilling, the investigators suggested that the house itself wasn't inherently haunted, but rather the ground it was built on contained a sort of interdimensional portal, or a gateway, that they theorized allowed spirits or interdimensional beings a gateway through. And so there was a lot of heightened activity within the house itself, not even because of past folks that had lived at the house. As this portal didn't discriminate, it was open to any entity that might want to come through, good or bad. Many paranormal researchers and investigators hold the belief that these interdimensional portals or gateways are scattered around the globe, often acting as unseen doorways for spirits and entities to move through, sort of like a Skinwalker Ranch or similar. These enigmatic portals have been linked to some of the most perplexing and chilling hauntings on record. The discoveries shed new light on why multiple entities seem to come and go, their presence rooted in this gateway of some sorts. Perhaps it's only fitting to let William himself have the final word here. He reflects in his book on his years at House 333, in his book, The Lady in the Bay Window. He says, quote, "After all this, I still call myself a skeptic with an open mind. I've seen and heard too much. Maybe one day Mrs. Tompkins will appear before me and fully change my mind." A haunting conclusion to a tale that leaves us questioning what truly hides behind the veil. And we might also find ourselves wondering, where else are these portals? So let's end with the part about him being a skeptic there, which, I don't know, kind of ends on a weird... I mean, I guess it's good to have that part of your mind, to have a skeptical point of view in some regards, but if I'm looking at a ghostly woman floating above the ground, see-through, I don't know how much more room for skepticism there is. I mean...
I can empathize with this skepticism a bit. I mean, it is an interesting case, and a lot of the same phenomenons. Obviously, the old woman. Now, what the cause of that old woman is a whole different... And I guess I can appreciate his open-mindedness in the sense that, okay, maybe it's a spirit, sure, but maybe there's something else going on.
Right.
Maybe it's a projection. You know, maybe it's all kinds of things. I mean, we've talked about with aliens, you know, certainly in the last episode. But I think he would probably acknowledge that something paranormal is going on at the very least.
I would have to think, you know, and obviously we know that, like, there are certain things that can, you know, it's believed that what poltergeists are really, they are manifested by a living person. So it's real activity, but the energy is manifested by a living person. So maybe there's something to that, especially with if the family was really going through a rough time, maybe in ways it could manifest. I'm not sure, but yeah, it just seems weird to
to have all those experiences and then go, I'm a skeptic at the end of the day.
And to write a book too on top of it and say you're still, I don't know. But folks, that is going to wrap us up for the haunting of House 333. Wow. I'll tell you, Gage, I'm glad we're kind of getting back into our typical paranormal. They've always been our biggest episodes, and this episode, the part 1, got big numbers. I was looking at our listener stuff, and it just felt great to be batting at 1,000, you know what I mean? I got a list of names I wouldn't mind walking through the door while I'm on the toilet.
Oh yeah, who's that?
The names of our top-tier Patreon subscribers. Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face via Lungfist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the Oh-So Suave Sean Richardson, the British Bone Breaker Bex Gray, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Serve Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Vieren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, the Beast Benjamin Huang, the Devilish Chris Doucette, the Psycho Sam, the Electric Emily Zhang, the Ghoulish Gert Hankum, the Renegade Corey Ramos, the Crazed Carlos, the Antagonist Andrew Park, the Monstrous Michaela Schur, the Witchy Wonder J.P. Weimer, the Freaky Ben Forsyth, the Barbaric Andrew Barry, the Mysterious Marcella, the Hellacious Cale Hoffman, and Pug Blorb, the Poltergeist. Oh, ho, ho. All right, folks. Well, that is going to wrap us up. Of course, follow us on all of our socials. And if you want more, head on over to patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast. Gage, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Always a fun time. Always interesting to get into these very eventful stories, very eventful cases. And I hope our listeners enjoyed it as much as I did.
Well, citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
Good night and goodbye.